and welcome to InsightHive, a series of webinars produced by Healthcare Innovation Consortium today and tomorrow. Charlotte and Colleen and Ree are working behind the scenes, and I believe Colleen has put a link into the InsightHive in the chat. So if you enjoy this webinar, which I'm sure you're going to, please check out the others as well. So today's webinar is about when workarounds become worries, the hidden cost of going rogue, AI use, data protection and cybersecurity challenges. Workarounds can feel helpful, but at what cost? Before we get going, we've just got a few slides to tell you a little bit about Healthcare Innovation Consortium. So, and before we do that, just a bit of housekeeping. Participants' audio and video are disabled. Please post any questions you have using the Q&A function at any time. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll try and pick those up either during the chat, the webinar, or if we have some time at the end. This session is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording within 48 hours, and also the slides will be made available via email. So a bit about Healthcare Innovation Consortium. We run the Electronic Patient Record Network, making EPRs work in practice. And as well as that, we also do consultancy with a lot of work around discovery, implementation, and then actually the optimization and the have EPRs been a success. So we're all about making EPRs work in practice. We're trusted by over 70 organizations, and there's a few in the bottom of the slide there. Next slide, please. And we're all about bringing the EPR community together. We like to see ourselves as ecosystem enablers, and the EPR network is a space for healthcare leaders, vendors and suppliers to all come together, collaborate and share learnings. As well as the webinars and white papers, we host regional and national healthcare events, and these are all designed to elevate voices across the ecosystem. So the following events are coming up with the Convensis Group. We've got the EPR Summit in Scotland on the 8th of September. We're in Ireland on the 15th of October, and back in Wales on the 18th of November. Right, so it gives me great pleasure today to introduce my panel. First of all, I'm Andy Miner. I am the CTO of HIC and also the CEO of SI Squared. And with me today, I've got triple J's. I've got Jonathan, Jamie and James. If I just ask you to briefly give a one breath intro to say who you are, where you're from. Jonathan, over to you first.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan. I'm down in the southwest of the UK, down in Torbay in South Devon. I'm a nurse by trade. I run a programme that helps newly qualified professionals transition well into practice. I also am on the Open Air Education Board, and I do work with various healthcare startups and existing companies to help them in the world of AI.
Thanks, Jonathan. And James, over to you.
James Millington. I am Field CTO for Healthcare for EMEA for iGel. I have a track record of working from the vendor side, but in helping organizations solve the clinical workflows with VMware, Imprivata, and Citrix.
Thanks, James. And then finally, Jamie, who's at the health conference in Amsterdam. Jamie, can you hear us out in the field?
I can. Thank you, Andy, and apologies for any background noise, everybody. I'm at a health conference, technology conference in Amsterdam, rather fittingly. So I'm a partner at Hill Dickinson. We're a law firm with a very big focus on healthcare and health tech, working for NHS bodies and suppliers around EPR and other major outsourcing and technology contracts. So hopefully lots of insights around contracting, procurement, data governance, all those sort of risk areas.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, so let's get into it. So workarounds. So we often hear that the NHS runs on goodwill, with employees often going above and beyond to deliver patient care. Quite often, this involves a workaround to navigate a bit of wonky process or a gap in the system. Workarounds can be a positive signal that people are trying to make care work. but they can become a worry when they are unsafe, hidden, unmanaged, or outside agreed governance. The first thing we're going to look at is why workarounds happen in the first place. But even before that, Jonathan, to set the frame, what is a workaround? Why do NHS staff turn to workarounds in the first place? And where do you most commonly see these behaviours emerging?
Okay, Andy. So in terms of what a workaround is, one definition is that it's any kind of deviation from an intended process in the pursuit of some kind of outcome. And they generally manifest in the way themselves in two ways. We either substitute, we do something differently, we add a step, we change the sequence of a workflow, or in some cases we omit altogether. We don't do something at all, or we omit certain steps. Why they occur, I think there are kind of 7 broad themes that I see. The first one, kind of the most obvious thing really, is capability. That is people simply not knowing how to do the thing right in the first place. So there's obviously a training issue there. We have usability. In other words, this thing is hard to do. We have efficiency. People think that the correct way is it takes too long. I mean, for example, there's one study from Canada in 2026 which suggests that 62 to 68% of medication admin involves some kind of workaround when they actually observe people doing the work. So there's an efficiency angle there. A very interesting area for me is about compassion. So workarounds also exist because the user perceives that the process is getting in the way of them doing what is important to them. And again, another report suggests that just under 80% of people think that technology interferes with their work, which is quite a huge number. Few others, perceived value. Do I see the point of doing this? Then we've got the people who are doing it. They're the bad actors. So we obviously have a small number of people who are using this, and it's a misconduct issue. And then the last one, which is really interesting, is those people who genuinely want to innovate and explore new ways of doing things. So workarounds, the reason they exist, there are so many of these reasons behind it, all of which are very, very interesting, all of which, as you said, Andy, give us signals. Coming on to your final question, where does this happen? That's the very difficult thing, because, of course, unless you're watching somebody all of the time, every single thing that they're doing, or you have a system in place that captures all of these processes, it's very, very difficult to know. But I suspect, based on the research, it's happening every day, every minute of every day.
Yeah, so these are happening, from the sound of it, workarounds are happening all the time in all organisations. So James, part of the, trying to think of that, another reason behind this is technology is moving so quickly now, particularly around AI. Yeah, it's almost daily changes in AI and connected systems. Are workarounds partly happening because innovation and staff needs are moving faster than the organizations can respond?
Yeah, it certainly can. And actually, Jonathan just reminded me. So, like I say, I've spent a lot of time in really the interface between the care providers and the technology and trying to simplify that. And one of the workarounds that leaps to mind is an organization where it took 30 minutes to log into the EPR. And so we had examples of care providers that would phone ahead while they were on their way in, give their username and password to a colleague, have them sign into the WOW, and then tell them to put it in a cupboard until they got there, so nobody else could touch it. So this obviously opens up to all sorts of issues. But now, like you say, with AI, if somebody goes and tries to ask what they think might be an innocuous question into Google, that's now going to be AI that's going to answer that. So it's a challenge to put the technology guardrails in place that can help. An immutable endpoint that can't be changed by malware. Users can't download any patient information. Secure browsers can check what's being put in. So it's difficult to put in that appropriate technology foundation, but now we're really seeing with some of the new approaches with healthcare EPRs moving more to browser rather than a thick client Windows install. There's actually ways of looking at the technology and implementing a more a better, more secure, better workflow system at less cost than trying to do it with the technology that was delivered 20 years ago for just a client server environment.
So just to pick on a point you made there, James, do you think that people are unintentionally going rogue because AI is so embedded into everything like search that the tools they're using, they're using AI without even realizing it?
Yeah, I think there's the unintentional and non-malicious going rogue that people aren't trying, but it's like all things. You start using some kind of technology in your home life and you see that it makes task A, B, and C so much better. People want to try and implement that into their work life to make to deliver better care, to save time. So it's not unusual to see that. And from the technology side, we really have to try and put in the tools to facilitate, but put the guardrails in.
That's interesting. So to the whole panel, next question then, are workarounds really a user problem, a symptom of system design and operational pressure, or sometimes a useful signal that people are trying to improve how work gets done? Who wants to go first on that one? Jonathan, do you want to got any thoughts on that?
Well, I've already forgotten the question, Andy, but I think I've got. I think I've got the general vibe. I think it's all three. Yeah. And I think that framing it as a problem is justified, because obviously that there is huge risk to all of this kind of stuff. But a more positive framing might be to see this as an opportunity. And you mentioned the word signal at the very beginning. If we're able to help people to voice their workarounds in a supportive way, that is giving signals to the organisation, to the EPR provider, even the legislator, that there is a problem here and something could be done better.
Oh, very good. Any other thoughts from James?
I'll let Jamie go if he's able.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think we have to recognize that these things do happen, and it's not always a bad thing, particularly in implementation of projects. We find that the scope slightly changes, and what you want to do is engage with people and do that in a safe way, rather than just letting people go off and generate workarounds outside of the scope of a governance and contracting framework. So I think we need to be realistic about it.
Yeah, and I'll just make the comment on the system design that you mentioned. One of the mistakes that I often see, a little less now, is the IT guys thinking they know what's best and creating this system and then just deploying it. And ta-da, there you go. And not actually having involved any clinicians in the process. So, our first step is always go find that doctor, the really vocal one. And everybody, Jonathan, I'm sure you know exactly who that is in your organization. And the comment is go get him or her involved from an early part of from the earliest of the design process. Get them involved and make sure what you put in works for the care providers.
No, I think they're good points. We've had some interesting comments in the chat. Nan Shepherd from Dorset Healthcare. There seems to be a perception that the system is built for efficiencies, in quotes, and not for the patient or population well-being. Clinicians report disconnect from reality, their teams and their patients. That which is resonating with what you say, James, about the system just being put in. So the workarounds might be an attempt to make the process more human and better for teams and patients. And then she says, it doesn't help that we aren't appropriately measuring quality outcomes or using the systems to collect that kind of data. Any thoughts on, are you in general agreement with that? Because Jonathan, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. That disconnect from reality. I see this all the time. Yeah, I can't remember who mentioned the workstation on wheels, the wows. You see the changes in behaviours and the changes in relationships when, in an acute setting, these computer systems are put in place, and it creates this not just technological barrier, but literally a physical barrier between the clinician and the patient. There's this thing in the middle, and people aren't prepared for that to happen. You know, that kind of stuff isn't trained. And the same goes with AI. You know, we now have this situation with AI where we have this third person in the room. We have the patients using AI, we have the clinicians using AI, and we've had this sort of shared decision surface. So all these relationships are changing, but I think it's a great point about the disconnect.
Yeah. And Kaz has made Karen Russell Surtees, Kaz, as we know her, makes a great point about getting things changed, getting official system process change takes a long time to get authorized and completed. Very often those on the coalface will adapt so they can't get that change, so they can get that change in a quicker, if potentially unsafe way. And she's added also when implementing system, very often the business change budget and training budget are the first to go. How true. I have been involved in many projects like that. Yeah, I think they're great points, Kaz. Just before we move on to the next kind of subject around this, I just want to kind of touch on the point there. So we've talked about EPR system or systems being put in and kind of being done to the staff rather than with them, with and this slow moving, you know, getting processes changed. Just want to focus a little bit for a minute on the what difference does it make if within the organization you're working in, there's strong psychological safety where staff are more likely to be open about what they are doing, whereas organizations where that's not the case. Jamie, can I what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as I said, I think you need to engage and have a governance process that is flexible enough to allow for that, and recognize it through the way you set up the governance from the outset of a contract. What you don't want is inflexibility, which just makes those discussions impossible. And that means having all the right people in the room. So the information governance team, procurement team, contracting team, you know, everyone who may be impacted by people trying to do workarounds outside of that framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jonathan, any final thoughts, or James, either one, before we move on to the next?
I mean, I can give you an example, Andy, of what you're talking about, how this can be dealt with differently, and some people on this meeting will probably be familiar with this story. Many years ago, I witnessed an EPR implementation in a big hospital in the southwest, and the workaround that the staff found there for simply giving drugs was to put the patient wrist labels onto a drawer in the treatment room because the layout of the environment was incorrectly configured. So there's obviously a massive safety risk there. But the way that the organisation dealt with that was to discipline the staff involved. It went straight to disciplinary rather than looking at, okay, what you mentioned psychological safety. What conditions can we create to allow staff to tell us this is a problem rather than going rogue and creating these dangerous alternatives? Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, and literally shooting the messenger. You know, there's someone signaling there's a problem, so we'll discipline that, you know, that person. Yes, okay, right. So we're going to move on now. So we've established that, you know, workarounds can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. When does a workaround become a worry? So obviously, you know, AI is dominating every conversation I seem to be in at the moment. So AI is rapidly evolving, and I'm sure it's being used to deliver workarounds. So I've got a question for you, Jamie. From an information governance, legal, procurement and contracting standpoint, what should boards and digital leaders be doing now to managing the growing use of unapproved AI tools?
It's a very good question. As you say, Andy, every conversation, as a matter of law, it seems, has to involve AI these days. I think the starting point is for boards to understand what the regulatory environment is for AI and for AI tools. And that's conceptually not easy, because we don't have anything like the EU AI Act, for example. What we have is a framework of different regulations through what the previous government used to call a pro-innovation approach. So principally, if you are, say, an NHS customer and you're buying technology, you're buying an EPR system, the key regulators and the key regulations are the ICO in terms of data governance and compliance, and the MHRA if the tools that you're buying are software as a medical device. So the very first thing boards need to understand and then disseminate to their teams is an understanding of those particular regulators and what they require. And without that, we find that that trusts and buyers tend to get into difficulties because people just don't have a good understanding of what it is they actually need to comply with. And in some cases, it's reassuring for teams to understand that, the main regulation they need to worry about is data protection compliance, and that's likely to be something they're pretty familiar with anyway. So that overarching understanding is the key first thing.
Thanks, Jamie. And just another question for you, Jamie, sorry, before you go. In terms of the UK being where it is, in terms of we're not part of the EU anymore, EU's going down a very highly regulated approach. US is completely unregulated, the entire opposite, and China's doing its own thing as well. Are you concerned that the UK is kind of hasn't really established its position, or is that in hand? Is it coming down line?
Well, it keeps being talked about, but there's nothing on the table yet in terms of proposed legislation. There is some anecdotal evidence that the UK is being seen as a good place to trial AI tools because we don't have an overarching law. But I don't think it's particularly something to worry about, because the ICO and the MHRA are good regulators. They understand the environment in which they work. They are regulators you can look to for guidance. And so I think we do have a decent framework at the moment. And as ever, the risk in changing things is, we move back to square one again, and people move to unfamiliar laws and regulations as compared to what they have now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, James, from a security and technology perspective, what concerns you most about rogue AI and unmanaged digital tools entering healthcare environments?
Yeah, so the immediate concern is patient data. So ensuring that there's no leakage that could compromise patient confidentiality. And while I'm not aware of any reported breaches that have been caused by AI use at the moment, there was a reported incident in New South Wales where around 3,000 flood-affected homeowners reportedly had personal details, including health data, entered into ChatGPT by a contractor. Now, it's not known, was that an enterprise account, which would be more confidential than an open account, but that's one. The broader concern is introducing some kind of malware into the organization, which could lead to an interruption in patient care. With the attack rates that we are seeing, this is a hospital's worst nightmare. And IGEL do a lot of work with healthcare organizations, both on the preventative side, let's prevent the attack in the first place, but also on the recovery side. What we find is that most organizations have their plans for the data center, all the high availability, but we find very few organizations have a plan for the endpoints. So you have your patient data safe. You may have bought an isolated recovery environment from your EPR vendor, but what are you actually going to use to connect the point of care workstations into that HA environment? We did a Chime survey at the end of last year. 8% of respondents had no plans for how they would recover their endpoint. 68% believed they could re-image their entire endpoint estate within 3 days. We worked with one organization, because normally the answer is we have no plan. We worked with one organization. They determined it was going to take them 2.5 hours per endpoint to re-image. They had 2,000 endpoints. That was 125 man weeks to recover their endpoints. So that is worst case. Right now, we see very few organizations that have a plan. So do those tabletop exercises, do the simulations, and make sure that your plan is going to work.
Good advice. What was, just, can you repeat that stat about how many days it took or to recover?
Yeah. So they determined it was a 2.5 hour process to manually visit every PC, take it into a secure clean room, re-image it. If anybody's re-imaged an endpoint, it takes a while.
Yeah.
Take it, test it, put it back. Optimistically, that was 2.5 hours. They had 2,000 endpoints. That's 125 person weeks. I'll tell you, just we did another exercise with a government organization. They came back to us and said, we can recover 1,000 endpoints in a week. To which we replied, actually, that's quite impressive. And they said, no, we've got 40,000 endpoints.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, that's the best part of a year.
encourage everybody to really think this through. And like I say, when you do those tabletop exercises for an attack simulation, think about the endpoint and how people are going to recover.
That's a great point. With that in mind, James, do you think organizations are focusing too heavily on restriction rather than enablement? And what does a safe alternative look like when now AI is becoming embedded in everyday products? You can't escape it now, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'm genuinely not sure if a lot of organizations are even set up for restriction. I think a lot of organizations are dependent on old infrastructure, on old tools that weren't set up to block the type of workarounds that can be put in place right now. Most organizations have got just a basic browser on the workstation and can let users change the endpoint configuration. Even I had one customer, they had an MRI suite which backed onto the cafe, which was run by Starbucks. The night shift person would come in, switch the network from the secure internal hospital network to the Starbucks network, and then use that to browse.
Brilliant. Sorry, yeah.
That's workarounds.
yeah, that is a workaround. So my next question was going to be about are information governance, cybersecurity, procurement, and existing assurance processes genuinely keeping pace with AI and rapidly evolving technologies? I guess the answer is no to that. So what needs to change first? I'm going to go ask Jonathan for this one. What would you say needs to change first?
Well, I agree with James's point that you just made about what was the point that you just made?
the technology that is in place often doesn't have the tools to try and block.
The one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of people out there who are so far removed from knowing what this stuff is capable of. So we've obviously got the digital literacy gap in terms of the end user, and then the point that you mentioned, James, that came out of my head was about not knowing how to kind of stop these things from happening at all. Yeah, that sort of control. And I agree, we're not terribly good at that either. So what needs to happen? Somehow, somebody in the chat actually mentioned the AI ambassador network. I've seen some good stuff coming out of there in terms of people trying to agree standards and ways of doing things. I would start with just people need to talk to each other about what on earth is going on, because as you said at the top, Andy, things are changing every single day, and the technology chasm, the chasm between adopters and people who really don't want anything to do with this, is growing day by day. It's really polarizing.
No, thanks, Jonathan. Jamie, any thoughts?
No, I think I echo the thoughts of colleagues there, really.
Okay. All right, so just looking at the chat, we've got so Stefan has put, hi, slightly awkward question. In the conversation about AI, is the assumption that these are AI models to assist or replace in clinical tasks or administrative, such as rota management, leave, back-end operations, etc., which would free up resources for more frontline staff? Richard Parker, actually from Hill Dickinson, has responded to that in the text, and I'm just scanning it now. Yeah, I agree with all of that, Richard. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of AI in diagnostics. It's really powerful there. So that's a clinical application. The other clinical application, I guess, is ambient voice technology. I think that's been really powerful, helping with the usability of EPRs, although the DCV 160.10129 stuff is being enforced around that. What we haven't seen, or I don't know so much about, and where I think there's real potential, is some of that back office stuff, using AI helping with, some of the kind of, what should I say, routine admin tasks. And I've worked on many PaaS systems over the years as a developer and implementer and all sorts, but they're all different, and most of them, I would say, are pretty clunky. So AI should happen. Does my panel agree with these the areas, or are you seeing anything particularly different or other applications of AI?
I'm seeing two things, Andy. So if you look at the kind of the traditional lean methodology and the Tim Wood's description of waste, that if service improvement teams went around looking at admin processes, clinical tasks as well, there is waste everywhere, and there's certain forms of waste that AI, agentic AI in particular, could be really helpful in automating or eradicating, so that the human can do more value adding stuff. The other really interesting angle for me is what's going on the hardware side. Apple are due to launch the M5 chip more widespread fairly soon, and what that is meaning, or what that will mean, is that people will be able to run full models on device without any of that data going anywhere near a cloud. So we now have a new workaround emerging. That my trust might have blocked my access to ChatGPT, but with my iPhone, I can take a picture of this patient's record. Theoretically, I can process that data on my device. The data never leaves my device, never goes to a cloud. It also doesn't interact with the EPR, and I can use a workaround that way. So I think the hardware is going to have a big influence where we go in the next few years.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, the Apple hardware. I did read, just before we move on to the next topic, about, and I've been speaking to a few of my colleagues about this, it's just Argentina has come up with a new legal category for machine intelligence. Argentina, the president, Javier Milei, has said in the Financial Times, Argentina invites AI to free itself. So the three pillars of this is there's no AI regulation. It invents this new legal entity called a non-human corporation, and a very low corporation tax for AI companies. So they're really, but I think the important thing about this is, just the final point is, it's less about capabilities. AI will be able to do just about anything digitally, going forward in a really short space of time. So I personally think it's going to be less about capabilities and more about permissions. So I think putting a legal framework around this is very, very interesting. So we'll move on now. So we have established that workarounds can be good and bad, and there can be some really positive things about workarounds, innovations and but how do we, but it can also create serious data protection and IG risks. So they've got this. So how do we manage this? How can organizations move quicker with AI and digital information and make these useful workarounds visible without compromising patient safety, governance, or trust? I'm gonna go James. Are you okay?
Sure. I mean, there's, I come from the technology side and approach things from the technology side. So, there's a lot of compelling events happening in healthcare at the moment that are reasons to look at what you have and reasons to change, from AI coming in to the plan for NHS England, which is to create a much more distributed healthcare, meet the patient where they are, make it easier for patients to easily access care. And while you're doing this, you are going to have to distribute the technology. You're going to have to put it in potentially in shopping centers. That's what we saw happen in the US. Clinics popping up in shopping centers so people can easily access care. Well, how are you going to secure this? How are you going to update it? How are you going to manage it? What's going to happen if somebody walks off with a computer from there? So there's lots of reasons to take a fresh look at the technology that is being implemented and the problems that are trying to be solved. And like I say, in a lot of cases, and to Jonathan's point about looking at AI workloads running and preparing for that. Actually, AMD just released something, I think, in the last 24 hours that is going to compete with NVIDIA's $4,000 box. The price will come down once we're over the chip shortage, and there's other conversations on that, but the price will come down. There are ways and means to implement better technology cheaper than persisting with the old models. So taking a look, being open to innovation, be open to change, but also making sure those security guardrails are in place.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so very, very tech-focused approach. Yeah. Jonathan, what's your view on it?
Yeah, I think that, as I said before, that the hardware side is going to really change how we're able to manage risk and what risks people are prepared to take. So there's an example of a German startup that's currently in alpha testing, where they've kind of gone the other way, and they're actively encouraging people to go rogue almost on device by creating their own ways of working. So this is a system which runs on device, which allows people to design their own AI scribe, to interact with medical records on their own. And the idea is that then people can share what models they've created with the community in a similar kind of way into how almost Minecraft works. It's a very, very creative kind of way of working. And I don't know how that is going to interact with the legal side and how we're going to keep people safe from technology that they might not necessarily understand. That's a real challenge.
Which brings me nicely on to Jamie. So I think, so following on from Jonathan's comments there, how can organisations move faster with AI and digital innovation from a legal perspective, Jamie?
Yeah, so I think we've sort of talked about the data side of things. Excuse me. I think one thing we haven't really talked about is procurement. And procurement law doesn't easily sit with fast adoption of AI technologies. Procurement law doesn't recognize particularly technology contracts or AI contracts, doesn't recognize trials or pilots. It just applies when you award a contract of some kind. So it can be difficult for trust to adopt things quickly, try them, discard them if they don't work, and move on, because you have to comply with procurement processes. And it also means that if you do award a contract, you need to think about how you might modify it in order to stay compliant with procurement law. If you want to change an AI tool, or say allow a subcontract to come in with a particular new product, and manage the risk of challenge around that. So I guess the proactive way to manage that is for innovation teams to be working with their procurement teams and making sure that when they go out to tender, they do have enough flexibility built into contracts to allow for downstream involvement and procurement of AI providers and their tools. So slightly different to the data point, but I think that's one thing that does need to be looked at.
Great points. Okay, so another question then to the whole panel. What kind of lightweight assessment framework could help teams distinguish between a useful workaround that should be adopted, a risky workaround that needs redesign, or a hard no, such as uploading patient details into an unapproved public AI tool, such as ChatGPT? Who wants to go first? I'm going to pick on someone then. Took too long. Jonathan.
You always pick on me. Yeah, gosh. So just to clarify the question, so is a safety framework for making those decisions? That's what we're getting at.
What could it look like? Do you know, first of all, does anything like that exist in the organisation you work in, or is anyone aware of, and to our audience as well, is there anything out there at the moment? Does anyone know about these assessment frameworks, and what could it look like? If you're going to do one, Jonathan, what would you do?
Well, as we said at the very beginning, what is paramount here is patient safety, and risk and safety is a very personal thing. We talk about this in the program that I run, and a hazard is fairly fixed. The risk of it happening is fairly obvious, but our attitude towards what is acceptable is very different amongst different people. So it's quite subjective. And I think that an assessment format for this would be maybe going back to old school Lean and Six Sigma, which is looking at things like FMEA analysis and figuring out exactly what the potential consequences are of a workaround if it was to go wrong. So how would it affect the patient? How would it affect the organisation? What exposure to risk is there? And having some kind of formula for figuring these things out. But you need to have a big skill set to do this. You need to, first of all, have people being open that these workarounds exist. And then you need to have the right people to be able to map those workarounds and really understand the systems in which those workarounds exist, so you can assess that risk. So there's a big capability problem here, because I think in many NHS organisations that capability is either in very short supply because of resourcing, or it's non-existent.
No, good point. Same question to you, Jamie. What kind of lightweight assessment framework could help organisations?
Oh, apologies, a bit slow here. I suppose what's interesting is the way some trusts are trying to take a slightly more systematic approach to the way they adopt innovation and AI, by which I mean developing commercial teams or innovation hubs or gateways or whatever you want to call them, where you have multidisciplinary people from IG, procurement, contracting, clinical, technical, all involved, and they set up some kind of framework that is proactive in thinking ahead of these sort of issues. And that is a good way to go. And the trusts that have done that have generally found it easier to adopt AI and use it successfully. So I think that's a sort of, from a governance point of view, an organizational structural point of view, that's one thing to think about.
Thank you. That's good. And James, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I just comment, this is one of the reasons that when you enter into partnerships with your vendors, is talk to your vendors as well. You don't have to do all of this alone. You don't have to recreate the wheel. A lot of the vendors will have looked at some of these programs or had experience from possibly different markets where that may be on a different time frame for the innovation. So find those vendors that can bring something to the table as well, and you can do this collaboratively rather than trying to do everything on your own.
No, that's a good point. Very good. Okay, Jonathan, another question for you then. So because you work in the NHS and not with the NHS, how do you bring staff along with safer digital behaviours, celebrating the innovation rather than shutting it down or creating fear? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, gosh, if I knew the full answer to this, I would have retired many years ago. For me personally, I think this comes down to culture within the organisation and within individual teams, and also the way that we discuss innovation and risk, which in some circles is viewed as two sides of the same coin, but in other areas, risk and compliance is very much a sort of a command and control punitive area. My NHS colleagues on the call might be familiar with people, saying they've been datixed. It's almost weaponized if something goes wrong and you're reported for it. And then innovation on the other side is all the kind of fluffy, things that people who've got too much time on their hands to be doing. So I think those safer digital behaviours will emerge when we have a culture that has a healthier attitude towards this relationship between innovation and risk. And in a punitive culture, where risk is clamped down on and people are stopped from doing things and people don't feel safe to speak up, what will happen there is that these workarounds will simply go underground. People will not report them. People conceal, and the organisation really loses visibility over what is actually happening. The knock-on effect of that is, of course, is the vendors also lose out. They lose that trust with the front line as well. So they don't have access to innovation and the real world view of what is actually happening. In a psychologically safe culture, where people have permission to discuss ideas and workarounds openly, and it's rewarded and it's reinforced, that I think is where you get the real wins and ultimately safer behaviour through people being more open and honest about the realities of work.
That's a great point. Thanks, Jonathan. So just keeping an eye on time, have we got any questions in the chat? No, we don't have any new ones. Please post them. If you've got any burning questions, post them in the chat. In the meantime, I've got a few up my sleeve. What is one practical step? I'm going to ask James this first one. One practical step organisations can take tomorrow to make workarounds more visible and safer.
Oh God, whether it's a tomorrow, I don't know. Many organisations will. I think just to add on to what Jonathan was just saying, in that cultural aspect, I mean, we saw, or we've seen, the increase in CMIO roles, which were intended to be that connection between the clinical side and the technological side to create, and that's kind of morphed into a CDIO role now, creating that point that can be the voice that has that clinician side and the technical side to say, look, this is a place where we need to go, and to have somebody that is empowered to be that role within an organization. I think that can be a strong first step to looking at what needs to be a workaround, and what are the limitations of the system that we are trying to work around, and creating a voice and a focal point, I think, for that conversation. So possibly simple answer, but just creating somebody with the knowledge that is empowered to take that lead.
I think that's good. I think empowering somebody to take it, I think that's an important step. Jamie, same question to you. What practical step organizations can take tomorrow?
So I think, just building on that, really, I think one of the biggest risks around this is sort of siloed working, when you have different teams not joined up in their thinking, and that leads to legal risk as well. So I think just the proactivity of trying to think ahead and having the right people in the room with a lead, as we've just spoken about, is the number one thing that can make a difference, and make sure everything is on the table and all the risks that could arise are surfaced at the outset.
Thanks, Jamie. And Jonathan, no surprises. Same question to you. What do you think? One practical thing.
I'm going to give you three, so I'll break it down into thirds, right? So I think getting everybody to do days in the life. Actually, go and observe. If you're making a system, go and observe it being used in the environment in which it's used. So day in the life. I'd like to see more sandbox environments, simulation, where people can try out these things safely and have experts looking at the risk. Okay, I think that's really important. And then the final thing is I think we could really reframe this idea of workarounds as being some kind of deviant to somebody who has found a better way. And again, going back to lean, and you look at the work of Toyota and Unipart, that they in their ComCell discussions, they talk every single day. They ask the question, what would have been even better if? Okay, and your workaround is that signal. That is the signal that you're looking for. So get people to really open up and tell you what those workarounds are. You never know where it could lead.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We've got a question in from Nan. Thanks, Nan. Says, how might tech corporations, good one, be encouraged to apply quality of life measures as part of impact measurement along with financial measures, and how might they get shareholder buy-in for this? Oh, that's a meaty question. Right, so how might tech corporations be encouraged to apply quality of life measures as part of impact measurement along with financial measures, and how might they get shareholder buy-in for this? Who wants to tackle that one? So the tech corporations. So I guess we're talking, the open AIs, the Anthropics, Google. How could they be encouraged to apply quality of life measures as part of impact measurement? That's a good one. I guess that would have to come at quite a high level, wouldn't it? Yeah, Jamie.
Well, Andy, I mean, one thing that would force them is procurement. If procurement, and I don't just mean by individual buyers, but I mean, the frameworks like the big SBS AI framework, which has just been published. If those things can focus on these type of measures, then that's one way that you do it. Because that obviously forces the suppliers to do so.
I think that's it. I think it would. Yeah, I think you're right. It has to come at that level, procurement level. Jonathan, James, any thoughts on that? Otherwise, I'll move on. Have you got any?
Yeah, I don't know about getting shareholder buy-in. I think whether they manage it or not, I think a lot of tech companies do look for the data of how they can positively impact, and with financial measures, it's something we tried to do. It can be very difficult, and it's definitely a partnership on working with organizations to assess this. I know that the simple case used to be when I worked for Imprivator, and that was all about the badge tap and the time to access the clinical information. And working with organizations, we would do time motion studies to collect that information and show the financial benefit. So I think most organizations want to do this. It can be really difficult to get this data, but it can be mutually beneficial when the technology organizations can partner with the healthcare organizations to show these mutual benefits.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, well, thank you guys. Thank you to my panel, James, Jonathan, and Jamie. Just before we move on to the slides, I'm just going to ask you for one final thought each. One thing you would like our audience to take away with them from this webinar. Just one final thought, starting with you, Jonathan.
Go and watch people doing the work.
Very good. James?
Engage with your vendors as a partner and get the most out of them.
Thank you. And Jamie?
Don't be afraid of the legal and regulatory risk. Tackle it, but don't be afraid of it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all three of you. So on the screen in front, so Electronic Patient Record Network, we have specialist interest groups. I run these. We had one this morning. Our maternity and neonatal SIG is up and running and trying to changing the maternity world. We have a paper to digital SIG. We're about to launch a pharmacy SIG, a bed management patient flow SIG, and I think a workarounds AI something SIG is probably needed as well. So what the SIGs do is they connect clinicians, NHS leaders, tech providers. We bring them together. It's a great way of engaging. We're looking at solving problems and bringing the community together to solve those problems. There's a QR code there. If you'd like to join one of our SIGs, please scan and join. It's growing rapidly, and yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff happening there. And we also, I mentioned earlier at the top of the meeting, we do the regional EPR summits. The next one's coming up in Scotland on the 8th of September. Then we're across in Northern Ireland on the 15th of October, and finally in Wales on the 18th of November. Come and join us, please, if you can. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to my panel. Yeah, emails up there. Feel free to connect with us if you've heard anything useful. Thank you, everybody. Oh, final thing, please remember to fill out the feedback form. Don't forget, slides and recording will be emailed within 24 hours. I think that is it. That's a wrap. Thank you very much, everybody. See you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.